Welcome to Plot Recon, where thrillers get tactical. I'm your host, Evan Graver. Today I'm joined by Scott Urbach, a former CIA officer, global security executive, and now a thriller author bringing real world espionage to the page. His debut novel, Admit Nothing, launches readers into the high stakes world of CIA officer Grant Hunter as he uncovers a deadly KGB infiltration at the highest levels of government. Scott's unique background gives his writing a rare authenticity, sharpened by years inside the intelligence community and now channeled into fiction that blends insider detail with pulse pounding storytelling. Welcome to the show, Scott.
And thank you very much. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I always want to put your best foot forward, and uh, when you're introducing somebody, and I had one guy tell me that I should just follow him around and introduce him all the time. So
I would agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess the first question I have, and probably what the listeners want to hear, is how did you get into the CIA and what did you do?
So I joined the agency right out of school in 1984. Now, mind you, this was a time when, quite frankly, the agency was looking for the all-American men and women that can pass a polygraph test, and it was a different time. Clearly, nowadays they're looking for people that have a lot of extensive overseas experience, and especially in the operations side, and can speak 7 different Middle East dialects, things like that. But I was the all-American boy that could pass a polygraph and came out of school. I went to school in San Diego, UC San Diego, and had a degree in political science. And I'll be dating myself, so it was all pre-internet, right? So I walked into the Career Center, and up on the wall was a list of various binders of companies and government agencies and whatnot. And I pulled down the one that said Central Intelligence Agency and paged through it. They were looking for a number of different types of officers. I was drawn to the Office of Security and went home, and I guess I probably typed up a letter. I don't know if I hand wrote it, but I had to, send it off in an envelope, lick a stamp, and send an envelope off. And a few weeks later, I got a phone call from Mr. Jones, and I thought, well, that's got to be a pseudonym. Turns out his name really was Jones, asking for an interview, and I just went through the process from there. And by the time I reached the polygraph stage back in DC, I was relatively confident I was going to, get the position at that point. I didn't think I'd fail the polygraph.
Okay.
And I didn't.
No, obviously not. So how long did you spend in the agency?
I was in for 10 years, from 84 to 94. And that was a great time. So I was basically a Cold Warrior back in the day. And then around 94, the Cold War was over. We won. Yay. Terrorism was just kind of getting going. And one of my last assignments in the agency was they embedded me in a couple defense contractors, into a specific defense contractor on the West Coast, where I learned the difficulties that the contractor community had in dealing with government contracts. And this one had multiple contracts, one with the agency, one with the Air Force, one with the Navy, things like that, and with competing types of requirements. And I mean, it wasn't quite this bad, but close to it. The agency rep could come in and say, I want this skiff painted blue. And the Air Force rep would come in and say, I want this skiff painted pink. And, there were all that type of things going on. So I spent a year embedded with them, then had another assignment as their quote unquote customer, working back with them. And during that time, there was, very strong non-competes and non-solicitation agreements between the agency and this company, so they wouldn't come and poach me away. Lawyers didn't look at it closely enough because it was with the company, not with the individuals I was working for. They then moved on to another defense contractor and reached out and, gave me the pitch of, okay, would you like to make the jump into private industry? And I had no intention of doing so, but at that time, not like what's going on now. But at that time, the agency was going through a reduction in force where they were offering incentivized early outs for people to leave. And I wasn't the type of person they wanted to leave. I firmly believe that, but there was a financial incentive to go, plus the financial incentive of moving into the private sector, and then on top of that, an increased salary. I had a growing family. It was a gut wrenching decision. But at that time, I decided, okay, I'm good. Oh, and by the way, they were then asking me to return to headquarters for a new assignment that they couldn't articulate. I said, "Do you have a role for me?" No. Do you, would it be a promotional opportunity? No. Would it be this type of job or that type of job? We don't know. We just want you to come back. It was a little rigid in that. And so I made the decision. Well, I think if I'm going to do it, it's either I needed to, stay for the duration, or at that time, 10 years in, do I take my experience in the agency and put it to use in the private industry? And that's eventually what I decided to do. And I've been doing that. Again, you can tell by the gray hair, I've been at this for a while. So for I was 10 years in the agency. And then for the last 30 years, I've moved from one corporate security job to another through a series of all international companies, and culminating to most recently, I spent 12 years as a chief security officer for one of the big three automotive companies here in Detroit. I retired for about 5 minutes. I knew I'd do something else, but I decided I'd done enough. I was going to retire. At which point, that's what just led me down the writing path. And then I screwed up one day and accepted a phone call from a headhunter who had a compelling opportunity for me with another company in an area I'd never been in, and decided, okay, maybe there's one last hurrah in the corporate world. So I am back in the corporate world now.
So how do you balance the corporate world and writing your next novel?
It's been a challenge, quite frankly, because when I wrote Admit Nothing, I was during my brief retirement, and I was staying up late and working, getting up early and writing and writing. My family had no idea. My wife didn't know I was doing it. My family had no idea I was doing it. I was kind of locked upstairs in an office, working away. And so I was able to put a lot of effort into that. And now it is a little bit of a challenge balancing it. I'm working on book 2, and I'm about 50,000 words in, but I'm now have to be a lot more thoughtful with my planning and timing to decide, setting aside proper time to write.
So are you a pantser in this aspect, or are you a plotter? Do you have it all plotted out?
I have no idea. No, I thought I was a plotter when I wrote the first one. I plotted it all out. I'd actually, my family had been after me forever to write a book, but in their mind, they wanted me to write a book about my agency time, which I wasn't going to do. I was, there was nothing particularly special about what I did. It was interesting, and I had a lot of great adventures, but it wasn't anything that I was going to write a memoir about. But I do remember at some point years ago, I'd put pen to paper, literally a legal pad, and plotted out a story idea, and I put it in a shelf somewhere. So when I decided to do this, I pulled that out and then went into Scrivener and plotted the whole thing out. And after about the first chapter and a half, I'd gone completely off the rails, went a completely different direction than what I thought it was going to go. And I still have that, and that may end up, that plot may end up in a future book, but is nowhere near where the first one went. And now I find myself in writing the second one kind of in the same situation. I had an idea what I was going to do, and now I'm just working my way to get there, which I think for me is much more enjoyable. Is kind of because all of a sudden I'll think of something. Oh, that's a good idea. Let me see if that works. But it also leads me to waking up in the middle of the night because I just thought of something and having to either scratch it down, or get up and go find my computer and write it down. Because otherwise I'll forget it when I decide, oh, there's a plot hole and I've just figured out how to fix it.
I think that most writers who in the beginning think, oh, I'm just going to write, but it evolves into that situation where you're thinking about it all the time.
All the
and you
time.
have to write it down.
Yeah.
And and you're like, oh, it's that big aha moment, and you can finally wrap it all up,
Yeah.
which is, yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, for a pantser, that middle section is a struggle. It's like, how do I get from, the inciting event to the closing?
Well, and
So,
I've learned. So in book one, I I literally wrote it chapter by chapter by chapter. In book two, I got in that, what do they call it, the muddy middle or something like that, and I
yeah,
was just kind of stuck. And I mean, obviously, I haven't been doing this anywhere near as long as you or many of the other guests you've had on your show. Uh, but I said, okay, let me try and break out of this by jumping to a scene I had in my mind and I wanted to write that was going to be fun to write. Got got there, and now I'm trying to bridge, several steps to get to at least the scene 6 or 8 chapters down the road, and
uh,
that kind of refired the imagination and got me going. And I still haven't quite got there, but I'm working my way to meeting the bridge.
and that's key. I've done that too. You get stuck, and you just got to keep writing through it, and
Yep.
um, but I'm trying to write a book now, and I'm like, I'm in that 50,000 word range, and I'm just like struggling to pull it all the
Yeah.
threads together, and how am I going to make it work?
Yeah.
Uh, so when you decided to write a book, you said you had to get it cleared by the CIA. So what was that
Yes.
process like?
So that's an interesting issue that I have to deal with that many of your guests may not have had to, that don't have that lifetime commitment, to a secrecy agreement I signed in 1984 that's going to follow me throughout my life. That anything I write has to be clear. Now, if I write a cookbook, I don't need to send it to them. But when I wrote Admit Nothing, I had to send them my manuscript. It's the Central Intelligence Agency Pre-Publication Classification Review Board. And so I had to send that off to them, where they would then review the manuscript, make their redactions, tell me what needed to be changed. Very explicitly tell me that I needed to, make the changes, delete the previous manuscript from my hard drive, delete any paper copies, destroy any paper copies, things like that. Now, mind you, I was very thoughtful when I wrote the book. I wasn't going to put anything that was code word classified that I knew was going to be an issue. But there were a couple things here and there that, quite frankly, I thought, it's been 40 years. Maybe, this can't still be classified. So just little things, a name of a building or something like that. And they came back and said, nope, you got to change the name of that building. I said, okay. They had me change. They must have, and I don't know. I haven't spoken to them directly. They must have pulled my file because I mentioned some things in there. The character Grant Hunter is, I guess we loosely call it autobiographical fiction. He's a member of the Office of Security in the CIA, assigned to the director's protective staff, where I was for 5 years, running around the world doing things like that. And it's written in the first person perspective of Grant Hunter, so it's kind of got that autobiographical voice. And in it, Hunter says at one point that he worked out of the XYZ field office, which I knew to be closed. It closed after, during my time. And so I thought it was okay to say that. And they said no. So I changed the name of the field office, something like that. Interestingly, they asked me to redact something that I completely made up. There's a scene where protective agent is up in the DCI suite on the 7th floor, stands up behind his desk, from his desk in the command post, and the narration is Hunter says, where I knew there to be this type of weapon, in the knee well of that desk, which I completely made up. And they made me redact that, which then made me think, well, it's been 40 years. Maybe there is one of those weapons in that desk now. And I just happened to stumble upon it. So I changed, things like that. There were a couple names they wanted me to change for whatever reason. None of it was certainly, you know, uh, a change to the heart of the story. They were just kind of ancillary parts. So I did that, and once I made those changes, then I was able to, go on and make other. As long as I didn't, completely blow up the book and do something totally different, it doesn't have to go back to them for multiple rounds of reviews. It was just the first cut. I think I'll have even less of that in the second book. The first one, again, I did it as a way to kind of amuse the family. There's a lot of Easter eggs in there for them to find. There's a lot of the story of Grant Hunter and the stories he tells about meeting his wife, who's the main character in the book, how he met her, where they had their first date, where their wedding was, things like that. So, I mean, this is a spy thriller, and it's not a romance novel, but there are elements of that as far as the storylines. In the story, his wife is a constant thread through the story for some tragic reasons that I won't give away in the book, but I mean here. But so all of those are true, though. Where we met and how I introduced myself to, and all that kind of stuff was in the book. So that was something fun, for the family to read about as I got through it.
So how much did your wife want redacted?
So far, that's funny you should say that. The family has not asked for any redactions. I actually made a lot of them characters in the book, some of them in true name. My daughter started dating this man, her now husband, and she was reluctant to introduce me to him because she was sure that I would like him a lot and wasn't so sure how much she liked him at the time early on in the relationship. He was a graduate of the Merchant Marine Academy, ran around the world doing that, and then became an Army officer, was a major in the Army flying helicopters and combat missions in Afghanistan. But the joke was his family is Russian. His father's Russian, his mother's Romanian. And the standing joke when we first met was, oh, he's a KGB agent sent to infiltrate our family. So, of course, I made him a double agent in the book, a KGB double agent in the book. And so none of them asked me to redact anything as far as the family goes yet. Now, they all have to stay on their toes because I said, you're still in the book, too. Now, whether you make it out of book 2 or not, I don't know. We'll have to see how don't piss me off or I'll kill you off of the book.
That's we always want to kill off our families at some point, right?
well, it's and that that again made it a fun and interesting way for me to write the book. Especially my first one, and believe me, I'm sitting here right now with full-blown imposter syndrome, coursing through my veins because. Knowing the caliber of authors that you've had on here in the past, I'm pinching myself because I know that you had, Wayne Stinnett on, I think in your last episode, who actually completely unknown to him played a role in my deciding to become an author. It was I've read every one of his books and, all through his Jesse McDermott series and all of that, and the Charity Styles and all of them. But it was his, I think it was called Blue Collar to No Collar book, where he talks about his journey from Marine to truck driver to boat captain or vice versa to author. And I read that, and that's where the light bulb went on. It's like, oh, I'm not going to write a memoir. I'm going to write a novel incorporating a lot of what I know. And so I credit him greatly with giving me that spark to try to do this. It's just been a great experience all the way through.
That's great. I call Wayne the godfather of sea adventures and
Mm-hmm.
kind of the godfather of our tropical authors group. And he's helped a lot of us, well, unbeknownst to him or not, but the fun thing about Wayne is that you could call him or email him and he'll always respond and give you some words of encouragement.
And that seems to be a thread through the tropical authors group. So another convoluted way that led me to writing is as I was approaching 60, I'd always wanted to go to become a scuba diver. And my wife, after 35 years at the time with me, is like, will you stop talking about it and just do it? We are going to have a couple tropical vacations coming up. So I got certified at 60, and then, that was several years ago, and then decided to say, oh, well, I'm traveling. I need something to read. And I'd given myself a goal in 2023 of reading 100 books. And I did everything from the classics, Old Man and the Sea and Dracula, all the way through, every book you could see. And I wanted to see, is there something in the scuba diving, tropical adventure type thing? And I stumbled upon the Tropical Adventure series and all of you writers. And so Wayne, I think, was one of the first ones. And then it was Nick Harvey's A.J. Bailey series and Sharon Ward's Finn Fleming series that I started to read and get into, and that led me into this whole group. And Nick Harvey is another one, and he's the I guess the link that put you and I together, because I was watching him on one of your podcasts, and I just made an offhand comment to you saying, I think to this very point, how you said this group is, paying it forward and being very helpful for up and coming authors. And I made a comment, saying, yes, Nick has been great. And he has been. He and I have never met in person, but I reached out to him in some manner on Facebook or something, or on one of his pages, and he immediately responded and has been very gracious in he read my book, and he gave me a review, and he's promoted my book on his page and within his system. And I've been very, very grateful for that. That whole group, including yourself, has just been, I can't say enough about you guys.
Yeah, it's one thing about paying it forward is that, everybody has a book in them, whether they know it or not, or whether they want to write it. So
Right.
It's just about the people who think that they can do it, is just helping them through the journey. And
sure,
I think that's part of why we're here on this earth, is to help other people and to pay it forward. And
I hope that at some point I get to that point where I have something to share with other novelists that are coming up. I'm just at the very beginning of this. I published Admit Nothing in March, and with the expectation that most new novelists have, that I'd sell 3 copies to friends and family. The first goal was to write it. The second goal was to publish it. The third goal was somebody that last name wasn't Urbach who would actually buy it. And to my surprise, it's actually done surprisingly well. It's been well received, and there are people buying it and reading it. And I'm sure this was the case with you with your first book. The first time you see that, people in Germany and Australia and places like that have bought the book and read the book and reviewed the book is really amazing. It's a great feeling. Even I put out a post the other day. I consider myself a real author now because I got my first 1-star review. They were all 5 and 4-star reviews, and somebody didn't like it. And now, unfortunately, they just gave me the 1-star review without any context. I would have preferred a 1-star review and then they tell me why.
They sneak that in there.
Idea.
They just they like to sneak those 1 stars in there and not tell anybody why. Yeah. So,
but yeah, that's part of the game, I guess. So I even welcome that.
Yep, and they're great because that's what people always want to read, is the 1 stars and know why the product sucks, and then then they go look at the. So let me ask you: do you think your background as a case officer and putting that on the back of the book helped sell the book?
Well, to be clear, I was not a case officer, so I was in the Office of Security. So one of my first assignments was doing investigations for the Office of Security on people that would be like I had been, just before, applying to the agency, doing the full blown background investigations, working in a field office, and doing work in support of case officers and other things. Then I moved to a protective realm. So people those that don't know the agency vernacular always talk about an agent. Well, there's case officers and there's assets. There aren't really agents, except for this one small group on the. It's at my time it was called the DCI security staff. Now it's called the Director's Protective Staff, and we did carry credentials as a special agent on them. So we were for the lack of a better term, and we hated it, the Secret Service of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was our job to protect the director and deputy directors and their family. So I did that for a number of years, and then moved to some other program work with classified programs, and traveled all over the world for everything I did. But I was not. So at that time, there was the Directorate of Operations, the DO, the case officers, the Directorate of Intelligence, who I think is now called the Directorate of Analysis, the DDS&T, Science and Technology, Directorate of Administration was during my day. I think now it's called the Directorate of Support. I've been gone so long, they've changed the directorates around, which is catching me up, because as I'm writing the book, I have to think about what's the timeline of the book and what would be the right terminology, directorate or whatever. Post 9/11, the director of the CIA is no longer the DCIA. He's he was no longer the director of Central Intelligence. He's director of the Central Intelligence Agency under the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. So I keep catching myself. It's something that the average person wouldn't catch, but I don't want to get beaten up by my friends that are still either still in the agency or were, to say, "Come on, Urbach, you got that wrong. That's not what we call it anymore." So I'm trying to be thoughtful. I'm sure I'll still screw up somewhere, but I'm trying to be thoughtful about that. So, but back to your point, I do think it was probably helpful because it is a unique, I don't want to say marketing tool, but it separates me from somebody else that can't say, he is I am a former CIA officer. I do have inside knowledge. And in my inside knowledge, obviously I'm not going to do anything on the classified world like we already spoke to, but I tried in the first book to put things in there that were accurate for somebody who's never been on the headquarters compound, talking about the auditorium outside that we call the bubble, the Nathan Hale statue, near the front door, the agency museum, it's got the most incredible set of intelligence related artifacts that, most people in the world will never see. So I talk about that, and the Hall of Portraits of the Director. So tried to give a glimpse into what walking through agency headquarters really feels like.
Okay. Your CIA credentials do give you a leg up, because I write a CIA character, and all my knowledge comes from either talking to somebody like you or going on the internet and just going, okay, here's a flow chart of what the CIA,
Yeah.
administration looks like, and let me try to make sense of that.
Well, I just finished book one in your Phoenix series, the Rising Phoenix, and thoroughly enjoyed it in the character. And I can tell you what, you nailed it. There was nothing. I didn't throw the BS flag and say, "Oh no, he got that totally wrong" or whatnot. I thought it was great. So,
well, I
your research
that.
paid off.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that if somebody like you read it and said, "Okay, that's close," and I think that there's enough old CIA officers out there now doing podcasts and interviews that you kind of get a feel of what a case officer is like, what their typical background and personality is, and I tried to incorporate a lot of what they talked about into my character.
And Yeah, and there are some great ones. Like right now, David McCloskey. I don't know if you can get him on the podcast, that'd be fantastic. He's got an amazing series, extremely, from what I can tell, extremely successful. He's a former, I'm not sure if he was an analyst or a case officer. Um, and so he's got a great uh, series of books out. I think he's just about to release his fourth one in the series. Friend of mine that was in longer than I was, but also went on the agency to corporate security world. Mike Howard has a 3-book series out that I think is great. So I try and read, some of my colleagues now. I guess I can call them my colleagues since I've actually published the book and we have a shared background, just to see their take on certain things as well.
Yeah, I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of books about either had about the CIA, um, autobiographer, biography, or
Mhm.
fictional stuff to get to gauge, trying to gauge where I was with my characters and how things worked from the top down, from the
Right.
how the president gave an order to you know to how the characters would react in the field. Um, how
And
much of that do you did you understand at where you worked from? How much of that did you understand, like the case officer side of it?
so the case officer side, I had a lot of exposure with on the case officer side and the operations side. I worked very closely with them on in various times during my career. Trained, in the same area on some of the same techniques and things like that. So I've tried to be as realistic as possible, understanding this is a fictional thriller genre. So some of the things that the that Grant Hunter does in the story, someone in my position never would have done. And But you got to take some artistic license in these things. And in book two,
Yeah.
I'm writing some things right now, and I got myself into a plot hole, and I'm getting out of it by doing something that, well, I don't know. We'll see if the pre-publication review board agrees or not. I don't think exists a technology I don't think exists. We'll see if they tell me to take it out. But so yeah, I've tried to stay true to what I know and what I think is realistic, with the understanding that to make it as exciting as possible of a book and to move the story along, sometimes you have to blur, you know, fiction and reality a little bit.
Right. I One of the things I hear all the time is that the writers in Hollywood get wrong is that the majority of a case officer's life is just spent writing reports and waiting, and
Yeah,
it's not
like
all action.
100%. I mean, and I know that's 100% true, but it's no different than any other, you know, police procedural, crime procedural novel or action adventure novel where, you know, in real life, police officers' jobs are 99%, boring routine stuff with the 1 or 2% of, action and intensity and adrenaline in there. Same thing with, firefighters or fighter pilots or military. I don't have a military background like you do, so I have to be very careful when I'm writing any military interactions. I don't want to get that wrong. And quite frankly, I did in book one. I Thankfully, my son-in-law pointed it out because the family became my beta readers once I finally told them what I was doing, and I manifested the book into existence by actually having a somewhat advanced manuscript. I was watching a TikTok video or something, and somebody said, I took my manuscript, and in order to manifest the book into existence, I had it, he had the cover art and all that. He said, I had it bound by, I think I used Barnes and Noble Press or something. And so now my manuscript existed in a book form, and that gave me the enthusiasm to push forward. So that's a great idea. So that's what I did. Eventually, giving those books, to the family, and my son-in-law was reading through, and at one point, I'm referring to the type of aircraft that a Navy fighter pilot would have flown. And I said the A-10 Warthog, and he said, "Oh," he threw up his hands. He goes, "Nope, Navy doesn't fly the
Yeah.
Warthog." So then I had to go down. I know you're ex-Navy, so I had to go down a path of finding, okay, what would he have flown instead of the Warthog in this time period in the early '80s? And I'd have to go to the book to see what I picked. I think an Intruder or something like that. But
Yeah. That
yeah, so but
sounds about right.
that was a good catch. That I would have screwed up if I didn't have somebody looking over my shoulder and saying, "No, no, no, that's right." And that's one that, and I'm sure you're the same way. You don't want to have your readers who have that real life experience coming after you to say, "No, you really messed that up."
Yeah, that's always been important to me as a writer, is to, because I can read other people's work and go, well, that's not right, or that's not right. And I just wanted to be as consistent with real life as possible, and not stray too far into, you know, this is an unrealistic weapon system, or, Glock has a safety, or make mistakes like that.
That's one that I think all of us that write in this genre that know something about weapons. I've carried a weapon every day for the last 40 years, I think, through both my agency and then my corporate career. Yeah, and when somebody says they flick the safety off their Glock 19, it just drives me crazy because you and I both know, and all the gun people out there know, there is no safety. There is no thumb safety on a Glock 19. So
Yep.
yeah, so something like that, I'm trying not to mess up. Now I say that, and I'll do something wrong in this next book, and someone will call me out on it. But I try and avoid
Well,
that.
but that's why we have editors and beta readers, and people critiquing our work, and we can go
Right.
ask an expert. And like one of my series deals a lot with commercial diving, and one of my good friends has spent years as a commercial diver, and I'll go to him and say, is this realistic? We're diving at 300 feet. What
Yeah.
system are we using? What's the decompression schedule like?
Yeah,
So
that would drive me nuts. Like I said, I kind of got into reading all of your tropical adventure colleagues and their books and scuba diving. And since I was new to it, I was really interested and was trying to say, okay, from what limited I know, and I've I still am very early in my diving career, but I've taken a lot of training and wanted to be serious about it. And um, if I saw something that was absolutely wrong, my wife said something the other day. I can't remember what show it was. She goes, "This would drive you crazy because somebody is free is diving on air at 400 feet deep and blah blah blah." And she goes, "Is that right?" I said, "No." And shooting to the surface. I said, "Well, I think you do it, you'd be dead." But so yeah, I agree that if I'm going to go down a road like that, I want to either speak to a friend and colleague to make sure that I'm getting it right, or run it past someone to say, okay, give me one last sanity check before this goes out.
So speaking of getting it right, you had to have your book run through the CIA grinder. Um, for those of us who don't aren't in the CIA, weren't in the CIA world, and we're writing a CIA thriller, how much of that stuff would they look at and go, that should have been redacted? I mean, a lot of this stuff is on the internet. You hear people talking about it.
Yeah, yeah, and and that's part of what I have to be careful about because I have to think, and I've actually done searches where I was going to say something, and then I had to do an internet search to say, has the agency actually acknowledged this? And there's a whole plot line in Admit Nothing that involves the real defection. Victor Yurchenko, um, his defection back in the 80s. He was a KGB officer that defected and then redefected, and that's a key part of the book. So now I'm going back and say, okay, how much of this am I recalling because I was there, and how much of this has been acknowledged or not? And I fictionalized some of it, and then there's some locations that the everyone in the world kind of knows where it is and what it is, a location, a training base, things like that. But the agency has never formally acknowledged it. So I can't then, include that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are things that are kind of out there that agency that if I put it in my book, um, they would make me redact it, even though most of the world kind of knows where it is or what it is, something like that. But it's just until you can't assume until they have formally acknowledged something, then you can't. Is all plausible denial still. So
Right. So if you wrote a romance book, are they still going to want to read it?
that's interesting. I suppose if I wrote a romance book that had no agency connection at all, I probably wouldn't have to run that through them. If it was
Okay.
if my sister-in-law is writing a series of, I think she calls them sweet, cozy romances set in an island, a fictional island off the coast of Washington. So I don't think I'd have to do that. Now, and she knows this because I told her. In book 2, I'm setting the director of CIA's vacation home on her fictional, sweet little cozy island off the coast of Washington, where some bad things are going to happen in my series. They won't happen in hers, I'm sure, but it's going to happen in mine eventually. And so, yeah, there's mayhem coming to her little fictional, cozy town of Pine Harbor. But
So I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there about the agency, about some of the stuff that some of the horrible stuff they've done, with regime change
mhm.
and some of that stuff. Do you touch on any of that? I mean, do they want you to talk about that?
I mean, they won't. They're very clear, in much of the I can neither confirm nor deny statements that we always make and the agency always
Okay.
makes. They're also very clear that the fact that my book has gone through their review process is in no way an endorsement of the book or confirmation of anything in the book. So they won't tell me, like, if I were to write something about the overthrow of a South American government in the 60s that they may or may not have been involved with, even if it was unclassified at this point, they wouldn't tell me, no, you can't write that. But if I were writing that and put something in there that was still classified 50 or 60 years later, then they'd make me redact it. So they don't shape the story. They don't shape the narrative arc or anything like that. They're just looking there specifically, and rightly so, to make sure that there isn't any, classified information that is, being leaked in any
Okay.
way, shape, or form.
All right. I got to ask. There's a lot of stuff going on with the current administration and trying to shake up the agency. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, from a personal perspective, um, it just drives me crazy because I thoroughly believe in the mission of the agency, the goodness of the men and women that work there, and it's not just the agency; it extends to the FBI and other law enforcement agencies and the military. I mean, I'm as pro U.S. government as I can get. Um, and so, from a personal standpoint, it saddens me that that I just read just yesterday that the DNI's office is being, multiple people are being fired and all that. Now, there are people that for for obvious reasons, for performance reasons and whatnot, should be exited in anything, whether it's the government or private industry. Um, but that's the normal flow of business and everything. But a wholesale, you know, uh, Monday night massacre of firing a bunch of people just because of a certain political viewpoint, one side or the other, I just don't agree with. I think the mission of the agency and law enforcement and others is to be agnostic politically, and I believe that. I know there's a lot of people that don't and think that there's a big deep state and all that kind of thing. Um, but to me, it's these are dedicated men and women that are really doing their job and shouldn't be persecuted for what they're doing. So yeah, I don't like that. I don't touch on it in my books. There is a political element in Admit Nothing, but I badmouth both sides equally of the political aisle. So, because in some cases on the politician side, I have a little bit of disdain for both sides of, of the both extremist wings of politics. So, yeah, I try and stay away from that, just because I don't think it's helpful. It's certainly not good business for people like you and I to piss off half the country, one side or the
Yeah.
other. I will say I was surprised and maybe a little naive that, um, just the title of my book has 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 spun people up. I've received nasty comments on some of the marketing and whatnot. Admit nothing, and then somebody say, "Oh yes, admit nothing because the blah blah blah." This side of the political spectrum will admit nothing, and they're horrible. And then the next day, I'll get, "Yes, admit nothing," and there's somebody from the completely other side of the political spectrum saying, "So and so and so and so will admit nothing, and they've been doing this, and they're terrible." And so I'm like, "Geez, already," you know. So but I just let that go. I just let that slide. I'll hide those comments because then I don't delete comments and things like that unless it's something that's just not helpful for a conversation, to have something that has nothing to do with the book, just a political statement based on the title of my silly little novel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I could see that where would somebody would look at it and go, admit nothing. Yeah, the CIA is a bunch of
Yeah,
corrupt agency, and that they're not going to ever tell us what's real, and
right.
um, because I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about remote viewing and um, a lot of a lot of strange stuff, that UFOs and Area 51, and so
Yeah, who killed
it's
Kennedy and all of that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So it's a I think the CIA is one of those great enigmas where you can write both sides and like come right in the middle, and have your book right in the middle, but you can kind of hit
oh yeah,
both sides of it.
and and mind you, I don't, and to one of your earlier points, uh, I don't hold up every character in the every CIA character in my book as this virtuous, heroic person. There are warts and all. There are bad guys in my storylines that are agency people. There are good guys that are. There are bad guys that are bad guys. There are, and like I said, there's a KGB double agent that was a bad guy is now a good guy, and things like that. So no, it's not. I don't write it that that the agency is this perfect organization that can do no wrong and has doesn't have its bad apples, because it certainly does. And I call out some of them, and again in the storyline is talking about some of the more famous CIA traitors, Aldrich Ames and
Mhm.
others that were around the same time frame of what I was doing. So um, there's certainly good and bad on both sides.
Yeah, I talk a lot about Central and South America
Yeah,
in my books, because I find that area more fascinating than Europe for whatever reason.
sure.
But I think that there's a lot of stuff that has happened down there that it's a
Well, it's funny you should say that because, spoiler alert for your book one, a lot of it takes place in Venezuela. And
yeah.
didn't I just see 2 days ago on the news that we're moving, military assets down towards Venezuela? I'm like, well, you wrote that what 10 years ago or something like that. No, no, no,
I
that one
no
you wrote
about
in 24, right?
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
that was recent.
So
Um,
I had written that book, and then the follow up to it basically deals with Venezuela and Guyana being at
right.
war. And right about this, I was halfway through the second book writing it, and Maduro come out and said that they were starting to beat the drums with going to war with Guyana, and I'm like, crap! Now I got to throw away two perfectly good books.
Well,
So
so yeah, I was looking at that, and it was interesting because I'm reading your book and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this has all happened recently. And I had to look to see, you've got 6 or 8 books in that series, but you only started writing them in 24. I'm like, man, this guy is really pumping out the books. So yeah, I've got some catching up to do. I was telling you before we started um, recording that, you know, my author side aside, I'm the type of reader everyone dreams of, because I get into a series and I will read it from first to last. And so you can count on me reading all the way through all of your series. And then, like I said, with someone like Wayne Stinnett or Nick Harvey, I think Nick has 38 separate books across 5 series, and I've read every single one of them, and can't wait until his next one drops next week.
Yeah.
The third in his latest series. So, yeah, I enjoy the whole read through. I enjoy when there's some crossover between the series, which I know there is between um, your one of your tropical adventure series
Yeah.
and your Phoenix series, right?
Yep. Yeah. The Phoenix series picks up after, the last book in the Ryan Weller series. John Phoenix and Ryan Weller meet, and they don't really get along. Um, so, but I'm looking forward to hearing your critique of the whole series, and how much of it I got wrong and how much I got right. So,
Well, I would never critique your series other than, if you were to put something in there that, I knew was completely wrong, I might say, hey, next time, if you're talking about this character or this type of character, I might give you a little hint. But again, like I said, um, I've been out for quite a long time, so some of my frame of reference is not exactly current. But I've got a decent handle, and I still have contacts who I talk to. A lot of my friends have retired now. They stayed in for the much longer than I did, but it's always good to talk to them. And I said I left a lot of Easter eggs in my book for my family to find. There's some Easter eggs in my book solely written for 15 or 20 guys that knew there's a storyline about melted ice cream, and that's all I'll say. Melted ice cream in a CIA thriller book. There's a story that goes through the entire book, and I know it made these guys laugh because there's an incident about melted ice cream that I was right in the middle of. It's the silliest thing, but some of the guys who've read the book have commented, and one of them said, "I know who did that. I know when that happened and who did it." So. But yeah, so it's always fun to have things. I don't know if you drop things into your books to to make your family laugh or friends or whatever, but I put a few of those into mine, and I'm doing it
I,
again in book 2.
I when I was in the Navy, I worked for a helicopter squadron, and one of my good friends was a crew chief. And in that first book I wrote about the Ryan Weller series, I changed his name, but he pops up, and everybody who read that book, who was also with us in the squadron, was like, "I know that guy. I know who you're talking about." So,
So you got to be careful how in what light you gave them. But then I've had one friend that reached out to me, and because he knows the family, so he knew some of the names and all that, and he said, "Well, I want to be a character in your next book." I said, "All right, what can I use your name?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You may not make it out." He goes, "That's cool. Kill me off. That'd be fun." So I've had people coming to me saying, "Can I be in book 2?" I said, "Sure. I'll find a place for you." And
yeah,
it
I
helps
might
because
might be in a casket.
yeah. But I don't know about you. Coming up with fictional names is always a struggle. So if somebody hands me one, I'm like, I'm going to use it.
Yeah,
And then I don't have to come
yeah.
up and think of something different.
That's weird because I'll be writing along and I have to come up with a name, and it was just kind of like pop into my head, and then oh yeah, I can envision the whole character based on his name, and then
Uh-huh.
if you got to go back and change the name, then you're like, oh, now I got to rewrite this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. It helps me because if I'm using somebody real, then I already know how to describe them and I know their quirks, and so it makes the writing really flow because it's very genuine. I know what the person looks like and who he reminds me of, and the fact that he always orders 3 drinks at the same time, when eating dinner and things like that I work into the story, which gives some believability to the characters and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So
And that's key because I bring in some of my friends and give them those stories that we the Easter egg stories that we always tell between friends, and now everybody else gets to enjoy them, and
Yeah.
kind of brings the character to life a little bit more.
Yeah. Even if it's just an inside joke. I mean, there's people that have, reading my book in Australia and the UK and Italy. And I actually recently translated it to German. And there's somebody reading it in German in Germany that I hope will get the joke. I mean, they won't get the inside joke, but I hope they get the gist of what we're, of the whole
Yeah.
story. I'm dying for somebody to give me a review on that one because I want to know, A, is the translation good? Because, we can get into the whole AI discussion, but for something like translating, I think it's a very useful tool to translate a book to give authors a way to, make our work available in a completely different, language and market and everything else. You can go back and forth. Is it taking work away from human translators? I don't know. I don't know any German translators, um, but it was a something that I thought would be an interesting experiment. And somebody's has read it in the German, so that's interesting. Now I did do I put the book out on audiobook using a very talented narrator. Again, a family friend who's a voiceover actor and all that, and I think he did a fantastic job. So, that's kind of an exciting part of it's available in ebook. When I first did it, and I don't know your thought process when I first launched it, I just launched it as an ebook because I thought that's all that anybody did anymore. Because I read 120 books the year before, all on my Kindle,
Yeah.
and but then people were reaching out, is this available in paperback? And that's a few keystrokes and upload, and you have to have the whole wraparound cover. But I'd worked with a great cover designer. You may even know him, David Behrens.
Yep.
Did book one and did book two. Has done a fantastic job. Matter of fact, a story I don't think I've ever told. And one of the reasons that the book one went off the rails of what I had plotted is he and I discussed the cover and what I wanted and the elements of it, and he put it together, and then he put faintly in the background ciphers going across because I'd mentioned that as part of as something that I was thinking of as part of the storyline. But as soon as I saw that in the cipher text and all that, I'm like, oh, and that just kicked off a whole thing that made me go a whole different direction. So for good or bad, I can credit David for kind of sending the plot a whole different way than I wanted to. But he did a great job. So anyway, they asked was, can you make it in paperback? And then they asked was hardcover. And I didn't think anybody read hardcovers anymore, but those are selling. And then of course, audiobook was the next step, that made sense for me. So I did it. It's going to be because I used a human narrator because I don't know have you used AI to narrate anything, but I've listened to them and they're just not there yet. Everyone's worried about AI is going to take over the world. Well, not yet. They aren't there for certain things, and you can tell when an AI narrated book where it just doesn't make sense, and especially in the genres you and I write in. I don't want if I'm talking about the COS, the chief of station someplace, I don't want the AI narrator to say costs.
Yeah.
That would drive me crazy. So
Or minute is always minute.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so having the book out there in multiple formats and now in different languages, if that takes off, is kind of some exciting opportunities going forward. But eventually, I got to stop messing with the marketing and these other cool things, and write the damn book. Get book two finished, so I can get on to book three.
Yeah, because the more books you have in the series, the more read through you have, and the more people are interested in buying.
That's what everyone, the professionals like you and others have always said. Nothing sells your first book better than your second book, and vice versa. And so I want to get on with this. I'm really enjoying it, and it's I've already know where I'm going with book 3. Well, I know what's going to happen in book 3. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but so I'm anxious to get book 2 done so I can move on to book 3 and continue the series. If I could have a fraction of the success that you have had in some of your other all of your other guests, I'd consider myself very, very fortunate.
Well, it's been great talking to you. We've hit the hour mark, so we've been a little over. But I got to ask you one question, which I ask everybody at the end of the show. What do you want people to take away from your books?
I should have been prepared for this because I've listened to every one of your episodes. I knew it was coming. I guess it's just initially for when I first wrote it, like I said, I wanted the family to enjoy it and be proud of the fact that I'd actually stepped forward and done it. For those outside of the family group, it's I want them to enjoy the story, get lost in the story for some period of time. You and I don't write in touchy feely, cozy romance genres. We write in a more action adventure genre, but in today's world, anything that you can take you away from, issues around you and enjoy a fun story is something I really want. So I guess that's where I'm trying to write to, and hopefully I've hit the mark on the first one, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
That's what we all want, is to give somebody an escape from their everyday
Sure.
life and something they can enjoy. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Plot Recon, where thrillers get tactical. Thanks to Scott Urbach for giving us a rare look into the tradecraft and the operational reality that fuels his fiction. Check out his debut, The Admit Nothing, that sets the tone for what's to come. You can find more of Scott's work at scotturbach.com and follow him on social to keep up with the new releases and insights. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it, leave a review, and subscribe for more conversations like this. I'm Evan Graver. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, write hard, and keep your fiction tactical.